So that's it from President Bola Tinubu, that special broadcast yesterday. And we just took this aspect. Obviously, he did talk about a whole lot more. Major interest this morning would be the promise to businesses. And we have joining us to talk about this and a whole lot more, the Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, Mr. Bismarck Rewane, joins us virtually. Good morning, Mr. Rewane. Good to have you on the show this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So let's start generally by saying, how would you assess that speech of yesterday by the president?
It's an interesting speech, and I call it the Tinubu Marshall Plan. But you know that the Marshall Plan was actually enunciated by the U.S. president when the economy was in a state of depression. But that's where I stop. In reality, I think let us analyze it in 4 different ways. One is that there was a recognition lag. That is a recognition lag that was short enough that the president realized that the people are suffering and the people are hurting, and therefore he needed to respond to that. 2 is the question of what is the magnitude of this particular intervention. And 3 is the impact, and 4, what is the outlook. So the second thing that we're going to talk about this morning is the magnitude. In all, when you put all the things together, it's about 525 billion, and the whole savings before now for the month was about 1 trillion naira. In a 200 trillion naira economy, that comes to less than 0.5% or thereabout. For you to make an impact in an economy, for major interventions, if the economy is in a recession, it's about almost 10% for you to get it out. And for when there's a slowdown, you need about 5%. In other words, you need about 10 to 15 trillion to make an impact that will be felt almost immediately. The time lag between when you have fertilizers and seeds and all of these things and when you begin to see the results is going to be much longer. And so 3. 4, there's the difference between physical and institutional infrastructure. There's a lot of emphasis on physical infrastructure. Before you build it, before you plant the seeds and all of that and get the results and the people. So I think that's basically what I'm saying is that the pronouncements are good, but there's also the question of expectations. Nigerians are under pressure, and there's also a crisis of false expectations. Having said that, I also want to point out that there's fiscal federalism. So you need to use some of the money and pass it through the states so that the states, assuming that the monies are properly used at the state level, then it will have the desired impact. If the states are only avenues for leakages, then you will not have that effect.
All right, Yeah, so I know you broke it down there, but one of the things that I also hear you say is in reality, because we've had a lot of plans for palliatives, a lot of policy, that is supposed to help farmers, for instance, access, because I know agriculture is also one of those things that the president mentioned. How do people know these 75 enterprises, what are the qualifications? Because I mean, looking at 75 enterprises in the whole of Nigeria, I mean, that's very minute, as you've noted. But how do you even get those who really need it to be the ones to access it? What are the requirements? What are the avenues available for them to even reach this help that's supposed to be available for them?
No, the selection criteria there's nothing to be subjective to a large extent, but any intervention of any sort will be useful and be meaningful if it's material enough to alter the outcomes. But if it is so insignificant, which is what I'm pointing out, that 525 billion naira in total, and make it 1 trillion is nothing, right? It's nothing compared to the size of the economy. So the impact will not be felt that much in terms of materiality, and 2, quickly. But let me use a minute to talk about the institutional versus physical infrastructure. I think the president was alluded to the fact that 1, I feel your pain. 2, I want to reduce, I want to bring inflation down. 3, I want to increase productivity. And he alluded to the minimum wage. But when you talk about minimum wage, right, and I know a little bit about that. When you talk about minimum wage, you have to address it in the context of productivity. At least I know 4 states that have actually increased their minimum wage before now. I think number 1, Edo State, Lagos, Kaduna, and I think recently Imo State, right? So, but 40,000 naira in today's inflationary environment cannot buy you that much. Where 1 tomato is 200 naira. So there has to be much more impactful intervention in this system. Now, also institutional infrastructure, which cannot be seen physically, is also important. You now look at some states, when you talk about education intervention, we talk about Kaduna, Lagos, Edo State, educational infrastructure. What have they done? If you look at the scores of NECO, scores of WAEC, you find that the states that have invested heavily in institutional infrastructure are getting the results. And look at some states that have actually carried out initiatives to reduce the dependence on oil and fat. You go back there, you see, again, I keep on talking about Edo and Lagos, right? So there have been initiatives for like things like tourism, right? Which is going to bring inflow of tourists and visitors to Nigeria. That is the kind of diaspora and invisible flows that will help support the currency. But I want to go back to the whole idea that there's a time lag between when you enunciate policies, when they get announced, when you get the impact, and when people begin to feel it. So I stand by the fact that inflation is here for some time to come before it starts to moderate. The currency, the unification of exchange rates is taking place, but there's still, you can see some divergence. They need to increase supply. And also the effective interest rates at which people save, because national savings has dropped from 30% to 28%, and that is very important. So I just wanted to put that on the table. So one, the good policies, good sound bites, good pronouncements. Like they said, the devil is in the detail. The government has to differentiate between institutional and physical infrastructure, and that is done. And then there has to be fiscal federalism, where you actually pass most of these funds through the states, and if they can be well monitored, because there's no point giving yams to go to hold for you, because if not, the states can also raid the funds and use it for other purposes other than those which they're designed for.
Yeah, Mr. Rewane, before we leave this issue, because the president was talking about, and I think the target is between July and March next year, and you've also talked about a time lag before we start seeing the impact of any policy at all. But where is the household? People are hungry now and getting really desperate. Where are they in that plan? Help us.
Well, I think the intervention comes in at different levels. First of all, money that is stranded has a negative investment multiplier. So the fact that the money has been taken out of the pockets of people when they bought more expensive petrol, more expensive foreign exchange, now you need to recycle it very quickly in a manner that it becomes what we call investment injections, which will have a positive multiplier. You have to release more foreign exchange to the foreign exchange market. No question about it. You can't, right now, there's a lot of demand and backlog of foreign exchange. We need to allow this begin to filter, because you have to import those goods in, increase productivity, bring down inflation to some extent, or to a large extent, and then begin to see the impact. But you must do something about it. National interest rates, so that national savings rates increase, so investment will increase. So it's a complex web of macroeconomic variables, but the simple fact is that at prices, when one egg is 100 and one tomato is 200, and also the price of rice, I understand that yesterday went from 51 to 55,000 in certain markets. So sound bites are good, pronouncements are good, but the impact on people's pockets, people are crying, people are sweltering, and we need to follow up our words with deeds, and so that people can begin to feel the impact and begin to reduce the suffering.
Yeah, I hear you, Mr. Rewane. And a lot of Nigerians would also say, well, they're waiting for that impact beyond the pronouncement and a beautiful speech. But
No, it's going to come. It's going to come.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're waiting. We hope it don't come too late. But the coup in Niger is also a challenge to the world at this time. We've had coup in other parts of Africa. It seems those countries, I think Mali and all of that, have not. They didn't have a lot of impact on the economy and relations. But now we see the price of uranium, which is a major commodity from Niger, up at this time.
Yes. Niger is the seventh largest producer of uranium in the world. Uranium is the key ingredient for making, for powering nuclear plants. During the Ukraine war, I think most European countries, fell back on nuclear power plants. Now that there are sanctions against Niger, it means that the price of uranium will increase, and therefore, with that, people will switch to other substitutes, which is oil, gas, hydro, and others. So, to a large extent, it's good for Nigeria in terms of pushing up the price of oil, but there's a geopolitical negative impact of having a neighboring country which is under military rule, and we don't want the contagion effect to affect other West African countries. Of the 8 Francophone West African countries, 4 are under military rule. And there's something common about those countries. Those countries are under a lot of pecuniary and economic pressures. And therefore, the solution are twofold. 1, fix your economy. 2, build on your security, because we don't want any of this spillover coming to us. We have a very long boundary between ourselves and Niger, and not to talk of Mali and others. So we have to keep our eyes wide open, and engage diplomatic means, and also, but more than anything else, it's always the economy. I think that's important to know that.
And incidentally, our president is the head of ECOWAS at this time, so it directly affected decisions and
Absolutely.
all.
Absolutely. Now, I think we're going to talk about a couple of things on the commodity side, and also on the fact that the Naira effect on foreign on earnings of companies. In all, I think for the results that have come out, altogether, there's about almost 600 billion of foreign exchange losses that have been reported by companies, and mainly most of the companies. And that is almost equivalent, the losses, foreign exchange losses, is almost equivalent to the total amount of federal government intervention announced in this broadcast. So it's important. And what does this mean? When you look at it, it means that they have translation losses and also transaction losses. Most of the people that have reported translation losses so far are the big hitters. You have MTN, Guinness, Nigerian breweries, Cadbury, and so on. But behind this cloud, there's some silver lining. After you take the translation losses, which at times do not go through the profit and loss account of these companies, go through their other comprehensive income, it also means that when things change, they begin to recover some of this thing. But when we looked at this thing, we found that one company in particular, I think First Bank, actually reported a big surge. And this will apply to most of the banks, because their foreign currency holdings actually get translated at the new rate. It was 461 before, now it's 700 or almost 800 naira. And that led to a major surge in their performance. And this is at the time when there's a lot of the stock market actually has been lagging in the last 5 sessions actually. And so we expect 2 things happening. One is that because interest rates have increased, people are rotating out of those stocks and going back to this. But what is quite interesting is that First Bank is Nigeria's pioneer bank. It started way back in 1894. Their gross earnings were up 83% to 656 billion. And their net interest income was up 55% to 237 billion. Quite an interesting development. The electronic banking fee is up 33.19%. We find that very, very interesting. But the net gains from financial instruments offset their FX loss. They made an FX loss of 98 billion naira, but they've been able to offset this. So I think They come under multiple jurisdictions, both in the UK and other parts in Ghana. So they have to report to different regulators, and that strengthens their book. We also looked at Cadbury, which was the one-off, which is about 20 billion naira in FX losses. Cadbury has been having a good run over the past few years. But it just tells you how vulnerable companies can be. And the reason why most of these companies reported these losses is because their parent companies supported them, and they had to report due to their parent company at the official exchange rate. Now that exchange rate has moved, their loans and support from their parent companies now in naira terms has become huge. The difference between those two is what you call the FX losses. But these are one-off things. After a while, right, also Nestle and others are affected. So, but it's interesting that we understand that there's no gain without pain. The pain has come up there, come up in this manufacturing and companies that are in the real sector and service sector. But the Nigerian banks, who after a while they made foreign currency loans, if those loans go bad, and I can assure you that some of them will go bad, especially in the oil and gas sector, then they will now take a major haircut. And this will happen at a time when Nigeria is going back to the international markets to actually have its debt rescheduled, which we have to do because we need new money. And that's one thing that the Marshall Plan of the president will be more impactful when we reschedule our debt and get some new money to address the fundamental issues of the Nigerian economy. But all I can say is that there will be some more pain before the gains, and then at the end of the day, there are some bright lights at the end of the dark tunnel. But this is a very dark, long tunnel.
Yeah, it is, Mr. Rewane, and we pray that we're able to hold on through the dark tunnel until we get to the light. But thank you so much, Chief Executive Officer of Financial Derivatives Company, for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.